Sparks that I don't remember. Hold and let it shine. Fixing stars to fade away. Fixing stars to fade away. Fixing stars to fade away.
Hello, dear friends of Kabbalah International. Here we are with Mario Sabán.
Shalom, how are you, Nacho?
Shalom, Mario. Excellent. Very good. Today we need to talk about the external image. As I was preparing today's talk, I realized that one way to approach it is by considering the image in relation to perception and communication. In other words, the image inherently involves these two concepts: perception and communication. Before we started recording, you mentioned that the image is also obviously related to the concept of idolatry and to the relationship between our true inner identity and the image we project outwardly. What can you tell us about this, and what developments can we explore on this subject?
Look, the theme of the image is key in Kabbalah because the image, like everything in reality, is an instrument serving our inner self. In other words, the inner self is revealed through the instrument of the image. The problem arises when we consider the image as autonomous, that is, completely independent. Many people start to live according to the image they project. This results in the creation of a character that a person can do, and that this character eats this image of the character to the interiority. So the first question for me with respect to the image is it an instrument or not at the service of the interior? If the image is not an instrument at the service of the interior, then we are facing a problem. This means that the person is not looking inward, they are merely floating within that image. The problem with the current system is that there is a lot of emphasis on selling an image, often more so than on selling actual content. That is to say, the transmission of content, of course, has to do with the image, but the image is so important that sometimes it ends up phagocytizing the content. It ends up annulling the content. The idea of the image is that it should be a vehicle for the content. If the image overshadows the content to such an extent that the content becomes null, sometimes completely erased, then we are truly facing a problem. This is because there is a sort of image-based sales approach. Social networks have pushed us to an extreme in this regard, where the image presented online often does not match the level of content being offered. Therefore, there is a significant responsibility on all of us to study, delve deeper, and investigate to ensure we convey meaningful content. Otherwise, after half an hour of listening to someone, you might realize that there is no substantive content, just verbiage and language that serve only the purpose of maintaining an image. So I believe that it is a responsibility from the point of view of mysticism, our relationship with the interior, and therefore our relationship with the content. So in the third place, the relationship with the outside, with the image. That is to say, in the Kabbalah, the image is not bad, but it is at the service. It is not the end in itself, but it is a means to achieve. So, what we have to be clear and we have to keep in mind is that the image is important only for the ends and is operating as an instrument. If it does not operate as an instrument and is an end in itself, it becomes an idol. And that is the concept of idolatry. So, what is the concept of idolatry? The concept of idolatry is that image is somehow marking the end of all content. In other words, there is no real content. Instead, one relies on the superficial and leads a superficial life. This is where we can find the klippa of Netzach hedonism, where a person lives on the surface focusing on the image. Not only do they live in the image, but they are also preoccupied with constructing their own image, which, if it lacks substance, becomes a false image. They are creating an image that lacks genuine depth. So, what we say in the Kabbalah is that the image is important if it is at the service of the content. We achieve content if we really reflect, if we really think. But we are in a very complicated century because there is no time for depth. Things move so quickly that there is no time for rest or depth. I believe that over time, humans will need to reconcile this media exposure of the image, such as on social networks, with content. If there is no content, you can post on social media every day, but you won't have anything meaningful to say because you have nothing left to contribute. So there has to be a balance. We have to find a balance where not everything is content without image. Because the image is a vehicle. Because we can't annul that vehicle. We have to operate with it. We have to use the instrument. However, using the instrument in a way that serves not to live in emptiness, but to create content, integrate it, and elevate the level of consciousness, and then to be able to reveal it to the outside. What is happening today, and this is why I come back to the subject of speed, is that we are facing a speed where there is not enough rest for the content to enter. And of course, if there is not enough rest, the less you can, for example, work and study Kabbalah. Because Kabbalah requires time for study, time for understanding, of analysis of such a concept, of what each Kabbalist said. It's a job, mind you. We in the school have 2 years of diploma and 2 years of master's degree. That's 4. Why? First, because there is a lot of bibliography, and second, because there is a lot of experience to integrate. So, the experience one integrates, along with the amount of knowledge that organizes this experience, at the level of binah, or rational perception, is important for the content to gradually settle and take root in the personality. Although we know that content is in a state of constant flux in Da'at. Because I have to empty myself to fill again, we know this. But the point is not to remain empty. Because then, when I go to communicate, I communicate empty. So it is not possible to communicate only an emptiness of meaning. You have to communicate the meaning of what we are working on. So it's dangerous to stay on the surface. It's dangerous to stay at the image, because afterwards the only thing we are left with is the sale of the image, because there is no content.
Of course, while I was listening to you, I was taking notes and reflecting as you were talking. We live in a society that is often based on stereotypes, and every stereotype is nothing more or less than a simplification. What happens is that this simplification has an objective, and the objective is functional to the market. In other words, we need things to be simplified so that they can be quickly understood and easily grasped in a short period of time. After that, you talked about idolatry, and idolatry is also a simplification.
Of course, but the problem that for me is being raised here also has to do with a generational issue. In the sense that the new generation believes that more is better, and we still come from the last generation, I calculate, where deeper is better, not more. So when you go into the depths, and you realize that it is in the depth where one can grow without needing to keep up with the pace. Therefore, I am not saying that one should stop doing things or stagnate. I am also not suggesting a lack of movement. There is a difference between lack of movement, and speed. For me, they are 3 different issues. Lack of movement is paralysis. Acceleration is dangerous and in between. There has to be a certain speed with serenity, looking for the middle ground. Of course, there has to be proactivity, of course there has to be speed, but what there must not be is acceleration. If there is acceleration, that is what is happening today. In that acceleration, content can be lost, not only content in terms of communication, but the contents in terms of oneself. One can lose oneself in the speed of acceleration. For that reason, from the point of view of Kabbalah today more than ever, it is necessary to follow the advice of Nachman of Bratslav, who said, A person needs to have at least 1 hour alone with themselves each day to consider themselves truly alive. Now, when you really, for example, and I don't want to be self-referential, but it's important in this case to give an example. When I, for example, am studying for 3 or 4 hours, I feel that everything is there, in the sense that I feel that I am integrating, that I am growing, that I will be able to give something. On the other hand, if you have an administrative life with a lot of acceleration, you lose the content. Many years ago, I remember I met with a friend of mine who was a parish priest in a neighborhood of the Catholic Church, and he confessed to me and told me, I have so many weddings, so many funerals, and so many baptisms that I don't have time to read the Bible. And for years, I hadn't been able to read it. I would read it, of course, only during certain liturgies. In other words, this person had lost his connection to the content because of the administrative issue. This, usually today, at the speed of acceleration in which society is projected today, is happening, and it is really dangerous for everyone. It's dangerous for everyone because it creates a very particular effect, censorship due to acceleration. In the old days, in the time of the Inquisition, they censored you because you went deeper and they had to take the book away from you. They would take the book away from you so that you would not go deeper. Today you don't need to have the book taken away. Instead, you are overwhelmed with books that you won't be able to read because of the acceleration. There is a reverse censorship, so the faster the acceleration, the less depth, and they are censoring you. So it's dangerous how we are all rushing so rapidly, and I believe that Kabbalah needs to come in to provide calm, tranquility, and depth. It should help us offer something meaningful to others and to ourselves. Otherwise, this acceleration will not lead us anywhere. What can this lead to? It can lead to a distorted understanding of spirituality as a consumable product. In other words, if someone quickly sends me a message on social media, I need to respond in just 3 minutes with a tip. It's like when someone asks me to summarize Kabbalah in 1 minute and I say, I can't do that. I can't because if it is in 1 minute, it is not Kabbalah.
Thank you, Mario.
Shalom to all.